Hi class, Jolene here. We're going to learn how to use some healing tools to take care of some of the blemishes on this face. First thing we want to do is make sure that this image is high resolution. So we can see that this is about 5,000 by almost 3,000 pixels at 72 DPI. Even though the DPI is low, there's enough pixels in there per inch that we have plenty to work with here. And if I zoom in on this, you can see like right now it's at about 33%. I'll keep going up to 100%. I can see that this is not very pixelated. So it'll make it so that I'll have much more success with working on this image. If yours is really pixelated when you're looking at it at 100%, find a picture that has a higher resolution to work with. So I'll move back down here. Now, so the first thing we're going to do here is save this as what's called for in the directions. So we're going to go to File, Save As, and I will go to the folder we have for this one, Lesson 4 Images, and I'll save this according to the directions. I can click there and then change this to healing. Notice the directions say to save it as a Photoshop file. So make sure you go to Save As Type and make sure this says PSD. And that's because we're going to be creating layers here and we want to make sure we maintain those layers. So we'll click on Save. And now we'll take a look at our layers. And right now we just have one layer. We're going to make a duplicate of that layer. So go to right here, Duplicate Layer, say OK. And the shortcut for that is Control or Command J. So that's what I just did and made another background copy, which we don't need. I'll delete that one now. And we're just going to be working on this one. And this is going to make more sense in a few minutes when I finish this to see why we've made a copy and why we've left this one as it is, and it's locked, so we cannot work on this layer. It won't let us. It won't, because it's locked. So we'll go to this one, and we're going to start looking at some of these healing tools. There's one called the Spot Healing Brush. I'll zoom in a little bit on this. So since we're working with blemishes on the face, this could be a useful tool. Note that this is the size, this is kind of like using a brush, and this is the size of my brush right now. The shortcut for increasing the size of my brush, I'm using my keyboard and I'm using the right bracket key on my keyboard to increase the size of the brush. Now I'm switching over to the left bracket key to decrease the size of the brush. That's a really handy shortcut. The other way you can do it is to go up here and change the size of the brush by adjusting this slider. And remember, this is also the place where you can adjust the hardness or softness of the brush. So let's leave it, let's make it hard to begin with. I'm going to decrease, oops, let me undo that, Command Z. It's going to take a second because I made such a big blob there. So remember, in Photoshop, you can go back, you can do Command Z to go back one time. Otherwise, you're going to want to use the history panel. So see here, we started with open, then duplicate layer, and then we deleted that layer. So that's where we're starting back, and there's our layers that we're going to be working on. So again, I'm going to make that brush smaller, about the size of one of the blemishes, and then I could just click there. And that did a pretty darn good job. What Photoshop is doing is looking at the area around it and trying to match it. But if I keep just doing it this way, just click, click, clicking, I'm going to end up with different blemishes. So it's not, this tool is not really helping all that much. There's a few other tools in here that you can try. This is one called the patch tool. This one, you kind of loosely draw around a blemish in this case, and then click on it and drag to an area adjacent to it. And sometimes it works better than others to replace that area with what's right here. But in this case, it didn't work that well. I'm going to do Control D to deselect that. And then I'm going to go back in my history to where I deleted that last layer and kind of start over here with a tool that I think is going to work better for this. I'm going to use the clone tool. So again, it's like a brush. I can increase and decrease the size of my brush by tapping the bracket keys, the left and right bracket keys on my keyboard. I can adjust the hardness or softness. I'll try hard right now just because I want to show you that it's probably not going to be the best thing to use, but I want you to see what that looks like. So I'm going to try to find an area that is clear on this face that I can replace this with. So I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. And for instance, this area right here is pretty clear. So in order to tell Photoshop that this is the area that I want to use to replace another area, I'm going to hold down the Alt key until that symbol shows up and then click there. Now, when I click over here, if I just click once, that's how it replaces. So it took this and it put it right there. Well, that definitely made it worse. And that's partly because of the hardness of the brush. So let me try another one right next to it to show you the difference if I make my brush really soft. And then I'm going to Alt click right here and then click here. So see how different that is than that one? So I'm going to go back in my history, go back to where I left off here and do this proper with the softer brush. I'll click here and then here. And then I might need to click and drag a little bit. Now notice when I'm dragging, do you see that the crosshairs in the top right corner above where my brush is? That's the area that Photoshop is sampling from. So watch what happens if I move my brush to the left. Now it's sampling from that darker area. So you always have to keep your eye on both places to see where you're going. I'm going to undo that, Command Z. I'm going to go back in my history again to right here, and I'm going to click and just kind of do that area right there. Like that. Come over here to get this one and that one. I want to kind of get this whole portion right here, so I'm going to Alt click here and then drag down. And you can see it's picking up what's under that crosshairs. Now I've got a little bit of a mark right here, so I want to, and I've also duplicated that freckle right there. So if I click here, Alt click, and then there, I've eliminated that. But I can still see kind of a line right here. So I'm going to decrease the opacity. There's a lot of different things you need to do kind of in concert with each other. Now I'm going to Alt click here and kind of come down this line a little bit to kind of smooth that out. Because what you're going for here is to make this look as natural as possible. So if when you turn this in, I can see where you've made the changes, then you haven't accomplished what you set out to do. Let me make a few more edits, if you will, here to this. Take out a few more of these blemishes. You can see I'm moving around. There'll be times when I'll want to make my brush maybe a little bit bigger to get a bigger portion. And sometimes I'll want it to be smaller. So I've still got my history. So see how many clone stamps I've done here? I'm going to close that now because I want to show you layers. Watch what happens when I temporarily turn off this layer that I've been working on. Now I can see where I've come from. This is what we started with, and this is what has been done so far. So when you save this as a Photoshop file and then I open it, the first thing I'm going to do is turn this layer. Well, first I'm going to look at it and see, can I just visually see where the changes were that you made? Or is it going to be not obvious to me? That's what we're striving for. And then when I turn this layer off and I see the way it started, I say, oh, okay, now I see what you did. So we'll work on this just a little bit more to give you the idea. If I just want to, for instance, take out that freckle right there, maybe I'll go back to the spot healing brush tool and just click right there, and that worked pretty darn well. So you might be going back and forth between different tools. Now that one I can kind of see that circle a little bit, so maybe I'll switch back to the clone tool and make this brush a little smaller. And I can see here that it's already nice and soft. So maybe I'll just click around here and kind of just go around those edges to smooth that out. So then remember, we have already have it saved as a Photoshop file. So at this point, I just need to click on save because I've already saved it in the place I want to save it and as the name I want to save it. So I just do Control S for save. Now, when I close that, closing the other one that I had there, and then look at this in Bridge, or let's look at it in my lesson 4. There's that file, and you can't see it because it's a Photoshop file, but if I open it up by double clicking on it, you'll see that both those layers are still there.